But the truth is, the average worker who would benefit from an increase in the minimum wage is 35 years old. 35. A majority of low-wage workers are women. A lot of them have kids. Right now, somebody working full-time on the minimum wage makes $14,500 a year. $14,500. If they're a parent, that means they're below the poverty line. Nobody who works full-time in America should be below the poverty line. They should not be raising their kids below the poverty line. I am not going to give up this fight, and we need Republicans in Congress to stop blocking a minimum wage increase and give America a raise.
My name is Felipe Sosa, and today I will be discussing the issue of whether or not to raise the minimum wage in Cupertino. I would like to start off with a bit about the history of the issue. In late 2017, Governor Jerry Brown passed legislation requiring that the minimum wage be raised to $15 by 2022, and the local City Council of Cupertino voted on September 20th to attempt to push Cupertino's minimum wage to $15 by 2019. This is an ambitious goal, which has caused many people to rally behind the raising of their wages and many others to argue against it. Fast food workers are one group of people who strongly wished for the minimum wage to be raised, as for many the minimum wage is one of their main sources of income. Furthermore, the workers argue that the current minimum wage is insufficient to support living in places where the cost is very high. A good example of a place like this is, of course, Cupertino. On the other hand, local business owners in Cupertino do not wish for the wages to be raised, as this would cut into profits. Business owners also argue that if wages continue to be raised, then they will have no choice but to raise prices, which could affect their business for the worse. Ultimately, however, the minimum wage needs to be raised, because the wage determines whether or not a person can afford the living cost in Cupertino, seeing as the wage is a large portion of fast food workers' income. The fact that workers are highly dependent on the minimum wage is supported by a recent study conducted by UC Berkeley's Institute for Research on Labor and Employment. The city of Cupertino requested that a study be conducted to analyze the potential economic effects of raising the minimum wage, and the results were that the wage should be raised to better aid lower-paid workers such as those in the fast food industry. In the report, it states, workers who would get pay increases disproportionately live in low-income families. On average, they earn close to half of their family's income. It is clear that to these low-income families, the size of the minimum wage is crucial, and this is one of the main reasons that fast food workers push for a raise. Furthermore, a raise in the wage would offset the cost of living in Cupertino, which many fast food and minimum wage workers are unable to cope with. On the Why We Strike section of Fight for 15, an organization devoted strictly to raising the minimum wage to $15, it reads, "As underpaid workers, we know what it's like to struggle to get by. We can barely pay our bills and put food on the table for our families. It's completely outrageous and unacceptable." The fact that these workers are not being paid enough is supported by none other than our ex-president Barack Obama. However, there are those in Cupertino who argue against raising the wage, particularly local business owners. Before the meeting on September 20th, the Cupertino City Council held a business outreach forum to speak with local businesses about raising the wage. All 20 of the businesses who attended expressed their deep concern of attempting to raise the wage by 2019, which is a more ambitious goal than that set by Governor Jerry Brown. Business owners complained that their profit margins would not allow for an increase in the wage, and suggested that exemptions be put into the wage law. For example, that employees who receive tips should not receive a raise as they are already making more. Business owners such as Daniel Vu of Cupertino's Bitter and Sweet coffee shop also argue that to raise the wages of workers, they must either raise prices, which would then affect the health of their business, or begin to cut down on workers' hours due to the inability to pay them more. Mr. Vu, who purchased Bitter and Sweet less than a year ago, stated early this year, "The raise drastically affects my business," adding on that he will be forced to cut down on employee hours since he cannot raise prices further. However, ultimately the advantages presented to fast food workers by raising the minimum wage outweigh the disadvantages presented to businesses, as the survival of the workers and their families in high-rent areas, such as Cupertino, depend on whether or not the wage is raised. Furthermore, while it is true that business owners have to raise prices to pay their workers more and demand might drop, it is also true that since workers are being paid more, they can consume more and pump more money into Cupertino's local economy. This is one of the main points that researchers at UC Berkeley's Institute for Research on Labor and Employment found when conducting the aforementioned study. In the conclusion of the final report, it states, "Based on our analysis, we conclude that the proposed minimum wage will have its intended effects in improving incomes for low-wage workers. Any effects on employment and overall economic growth are likely to be small. The net impact of the policy will therefore be positive. It is therefore imperative that the wage be raised, as if we fail to follow through with this policy as a city, we are all missing out on potential growth of our economy, and we are failing to support our low-wage workers and their families."